new speaker at conferences. This is my first real conference talk, which means that this slide is really important to me because that's a feedback session, right? So please, please, please leave feedback. Because if I ever decide to do this again, you can help me reduce the suffering for my next audience, right? So be nice to the future people. Risks about performative psychological safety. I assume you don't often see the sentence risk, or the words risk and psychological safety in the same sentence. So maybe some of you are like, ooh, Clara, she sounds like a management consultant who's basically here to give a 1-hour passionate defense of management by fear and let's return to the olden days. If you're looking for that, I'll disappoint you, because I am very much a defender of psychological safety, any safety really. I don't like the performative. This is also not really a talk about psychological safety. It's a talk about the malpractices I've seen that claim to be in the service of psychological safety. If you don't know what psychological safety is, never heard about the term, then this talk might still be relevant for you, right? But just don't expect it to teach you a lot about psychological safety. You'll learn more than I had learned when I started practicing it. But it's a bit like learning how to swim when you're attending a course in how not to drown, right? It's probably going to teach you a little bit about swimming and probably teach you more than just being randomly pushed off a pier, right? Good. Last thing, last caveat before we dig into some of the meat. I'm not an expert on psychological safety, right? I'm just a practitioner. I just do random stuff. So this is a story about how I, as a layperson, have practiced psychological safety, and also very much how I've turned it around and changed my approach to psychological safety quite fundamentally. And what do I mean by this? So I'll start by sharing not necessarily the conclusion of my talk, but the primary learning that I've had over the last 10 years, which is that while psychological safety is good, right, our dogged approach or pursuit of it makes us miss the target. So instead of, I have this really sort of fabulous sentence written here, so I'm just going to read because then it'll make more sense, right? But instead of understanding what it really means and doing the hard and often unglamorous work to achieve it, we tout its importance and succumb to the lure of group exercises that promise a shortcut to trust, authenticity, and vulnerability. These exercises, however, don't come without significant risks, namely the ability to set safe boundaries between people and the team. So in the end, this achieves the opposite of what psychological safety is. It creates teams where oversharing and emotional investment are expected, and being just here to do the work is seen as cold, unprofessional, and lacking passion for your work, right? And just to be clear, when I say we, I'm talking about myself. But we makes it feel a little bit less lonely and a little bit as if I'm not the only idiot out here. I'm also talking about all of us who lead teams, right? So all of us who are in teams, all of us who have the opportunity to impact teams are leaders of teams, right? Yes, I, as an engineering manager, have more impact and influence on a team than if you are simply a normal member, but we all lead teams, and therefore this is important. So my goal here is twofold, right? There will be some experienced practitioners in here. For you, my message will mostly be about making you aware of the impact that your actions can have, and both the good and the bad. And then there are, for those of you who are starting out your journey, I want you to learn from my mistakes so that you can make new, shiny, happy mistakes that you'll then come back in a couple of years and tell me all about, right? Standing on the shoulders of, well, maybe not giants, but at least people who have made mistakes before you. So I've already told you the conclusion of my talk, so basically if you think this is uninteresting, lots of other talks to go to, I forgive you for leaving. But this is what we'll be covering for the next many, many slides. Essentially, this was born out of a rant. I've done my best to make this less of a rant and more constructive. So I've divided it into two parts. Part one, which is the ranty bit, which is where we're going to talk about what is performative psychological safety and what the risks are. And then the second part is where we turn it a bit more constructive to make it, less ranty. and we'll talk about what we can actually do about it. I do not think that we can solve the fundamental problem, which is very human, because creating psychological safety is unglamorous, it takes a lot of time, and most of the work is actually really boring, and really hard, and really frustrating. And as humans, we tend to look for tricks, right? The snake oil and the rhinoceros horn powder that's going to fix everything. I can't fix that, sadly, but what I can do is make all of us aware of some of the risks, and then we can see the risk, we can recognize them, and we can mitigate them. So, yeah. I promised you 5 questions, right? And I did this a little bit also because I know that, that here in the UK, when you woke up this morning, you probably didn't wake up asking 5 questions about performative psychological safety. You were probably asking yourselves, how did I get home from the beach party yesterday? Who is the new prime minister? And or even maybe, where am I? So I've devised a service for you today, which is questions as a service. There are the 5 questions here. And because I am a computer scientist, I'm going to count from 0 and give you one for free. Which is, why should you even believe in me, right? Who is this weird lady standing up on the stage talking about performative psychological safety? Now, I've been working in tech for over 10 years. For over 8 of them, I've been leading teams. I started off leading them as a product manager, and then I became an engineering manager, which tells you that most of my tenure, I have been trying to make teams deliver stuff, right? That's my primary professional job. Yes, I've also built software back in the days, but it's not where I've put in my 10,000 hours to become what some people would call an expert, if you believe in the 10,000 hour rule. And I'm also sharing this because credentials are important, because I think if the internet has taught me anything, it is that we suddenly have more experts than we actually have practitioners. And I'm here to tell you that I'm a practitioner, not an expert, but a practitioner, and to share my story. I'm also going to draw this back into, I think it was John yesterday who said it, that I am maybe not an expert on psychological safety, but I am an expert on my own life. I'm the only one who knows what I've been through, so therefore I can stand here on stage and share that story. Right, now let's get into the fun bits, which is what's performative psychological safety. This is the ranty bit, right? I'll try to tone down the rant a bit. If you really want to see me ranting, find me after. All right, performative psychological safety. We're going to talk about 2 things here. We're going to talk first about psychological safety, then about performative. Psychological safety, this is a definition taken by Amy C. Edmondson. Actually, you can see it down here, very, very light gray and white background, really bad, sorry about that. But she's a researcher in psychological safety. She didn't coin the term, but she has a really magnificent definition of it. And it says here, right, 3 words I want to dig into. First important term is shared belief. What does shared belief mean? It means that when you have a group of people, a set of individuals, all of them share the same belief. So it means that if you have all of the senior engineers on your team thinking that, yes, all opinions are valued, but the junior engineers are like, nope, that is not a shared belief. Everyone, also the juniors, have to think that their opinions are valued. The other really important term is interpersonal risk-taking. What does that mean? It is the ability to take risks or to feel safe doing something that is going to risk your social standing in the group. Because as human beings, we are not wired to survive on our own. We simply cannot, right? We need other people to survive. And that means that our brains, because they're wired for survival, right? If there's one thing our brain really wants us to do, well, several, creating new humans is one of them, but surviving is also really important. And because the group is so important for our survival, our brains are basically wired to make sure that we fit into groups, right? Being rejected from a group is one of the most horrible things you can do to human people, right? It's painful, it is excruciating because our brains equate it with a slow death or getting eaten by a lion. So when you feel safe to take interpersonal risks, right, it basically means that you can tell your delivery manager or someone else that, nope, we're actually not going to be able to deliver this project on time without your brain thinking, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. So interpersonal risk-taking and that ability is really important as well. Last point is workplace. This is about feeling safe in the workplace and about work-related things. I might be stretching this a little bit, but I think this is important and we'll get back to why. All right. I've reworded it a little bit to make it simpler because this definition is a bit academical. So I've tried to reword it a bit to describe what does it look and feel like to be in a psychological safe team. It basically means this, right? That at work we feel free to speak our minds about topics that are relevant for work without fear of repercussions and can expect colleagues to take our opinions seriously. That's it. That's psychological safety. Really important. I also promised you something about, other slide. Other thing is, why is psychological safety even important? I mean, it sounds really nice, right? And as a manager, I would love to stand up here on stage and say this is important because it's the right thing to do. However, that's part of the truth, right? The other thing is that psychological safe teams provide better value for businesses. So your shareholders, they're human, they're probably decent human beings and want us to be happy, but they also want profit, right? High-performing teams, better profit, psychological safety leads to high-performing teams, so therefore psychological safety is a really good thing for businesses as well. So yes, it's the right thing to do as a human being, which just also happens to be a good thing from a business perspective, which is where the performative becomes interesting. Because performative is a term I've taken from being an ally of underrepresented group, right? So it comes when you are more concerned with appearing to be something than being it. So a little bit like imagine a guy who's found out that pretending to be a feminist increases the likelihood of getting laid. It's not particularly charming, right? Might pretend to be very feminist and get the result, at least short-term. Long-term douchebag. Managers, while getting laid, is definitely not what we're trying to do at the workplace, right? Just make that very clear. We do also use psychological safety as a value signal, right? It is a sort of shibboleth that both tells our colleagues and anyone who might want to work at our place that yes, we care about human beings, we are the good guys, we're not those evil people doing management by fear and asking you to work incredible hours. We just want you to feel safe here and really passionate and happy. But at the other time, we're also signaling to the managers and the shareholders and the board members that we care about business outcome too, right? We can marry those two things, right? We can make people happy and through happy, productive, or well, at least psychological safe and then productive. Right. How could this possibly have any risks, right? I mean, this absolutely sounds safe, right? Nothing to fear here. Psychological safety, sounds good. Psychological safety in itself is safe. But the problem is that very often we want to get there faster, right? Psychological safety, in many ways, is very much like public transport or good UX. When it's there, you don't really notice it, right? When it's not there, it's really in your face. And creating psychological safety is in many ways exactly like creating good public transport. It causes a huge nuisance for everyone, it's obstructive, and it's really annoying because we have to talk about conflicts, we have to talk about the things that are hard, we have to raise our concerns. All of that is a bit like getting delayed to get to work because someone is, replacing the pavement in order to make it better to drive on next week, right? Really annoying right here, right now. Psychological safety also doesn't give us the high, like it's difficult to achieve because it takes such a long time, because we do it in small incremental steps along the way. So as a manager, it's really difficult, or a team leader, whatever your role is, it's really difficult to get that high of, yes, I've achieved something, right? Incremental successes aren't really there. So it's really nice and it's really tempting to build up something and to do something that makes it feel as if we've achieved something, right? Here, now, I just want that dopamine hit of achievement. I want to feel like a fucking success, and I want to feel it now, not in a year. So, common wisdom is that psychological safety is created through three things. That's difficult to say. One of them is being authentic, showing vulnerability is the second one, and the last one is, I fudged a little bit, but that's my interpretation of it, is that it's bringing your whole self to work. What does that mean? Well, one of the interpretations that I've seen of this is that authenticity means show me your emotions. If you are sad, cry. If you are angry, shout. Show us who you really are, right? You want to see managers who really feel it. You want to see your colleagues who really share their emotions, right? You really want that authenticity. Vulnerability is about sharing something that's meaningful about you, something that really hurts, something that you're really vulnerable. Another difficult word. You've got many difficult words in your language. Something that really hurts and something that's hard to share, right? Be there. Give us something. Give us a sliver of yourself. The last one is bringing your whole self to work, which means be unguarded, right? Be your unguarded self at work. Show us everything, right? And we'll revisit the terms later for those of you going all, right? How do we do that? How do we get to that rush of authenticity, vulnerability, and bringing your whole self to work? As a manager, I've had the privilege of participating in quite a lot of management exercises where we had to build trust fast, right? Yep, 20 people in the room, we've got 2 days. Let's create psychological safety. Everyone gather in a circle. Tell us your deepest, darkest secret, please. And the next one. This isn't creating trust, folks. This is just, it's a hostage situation, right? I trust you with this secret, you trust me. If you out me, I out you, mutual destruction, right? It's not trust. Also not very comfortable. The other thing, I mean, it feels powerful. Have you ever been in those situations, right? You sit in the circle, you share things. It feels extremely powerful, and God, I feel alive. Yes, but, so do I do when I'm suffering from extreme heartbreak. It's not really the same, right? The other exercise I've seen very often, not necessarily the one where you have to tell secrets, similar, but it's tell me a story about all of your life. A recent example is share a picture of yourself as a child and tell us how you got from being that child to being now in a leadership position in a company, right? I'm happy to talk with my therapist about these things, but not colleagues at work. And there are several exercises like this where in order to feel that rush, we share something that is extremely private to ourselves because it makes us feel connected, it makes us feel seen if done well, right? It can create a very powerful moment in time. It's very moving and addictive, especially those of us who haven't felt seen in our childhoods and growing up. And I think that, well, I don't know about here, right? But when I studied computer science, we used to be a lot of very lovable geeks, but maybe a lot of people hadn't really noticed that we were lovable. So we, being in a situation where other people go, ooh, you are valued, you are worthy in yourself. That was novel, right? Give me more of that, please. Let's do more trust exercises. I like this. Yeah. All right. I guess you could see where this is going, right? To me, psychological safety and the way I had seen it interpreted, the way I'd seen it practiced, it became about creating a sense of intimacy, right? Not the hanky-panky intimacy, but the intimacy that you feel with good friends, the one where you can share who you are and that you know that you will be liked, right? And it is really, really a wonderful feeling. And my conviction for a long time was that if I know your darkest secret and you know my darkest secret, then surely we must have psychological safety because we've been vulnerable, we've been authentic, we've shown our whole selves. Now this project's going to be a breeze, right? Easy peasy, problem solved. The problem, however, is that going back to the interpersonal risk-taking, right? As human beings, we really want to be a part of the group. And that means that that when we are put into situations where sharing your deepest, darkest secrets is the done thing, not sharing becomes really hard, right? Being the party pooper who goes, actually, no, I'm not going to do this. I mean, some people are amazingly brave and can do it, but a lot of people can't. So we really do want to fit into the crowd. And this is where this bit comes in. Boundaries. Because we all have them, and they are all unique to who we are, but they are important, right? And they are difficult. I find them extremely difficult to argue about and describe. The best example I can give is that maybe some of you have done this exercise where you stand opposite to another person and then you're both asked to take a step closer to each other, right? No? Does that feel fine? Yes, okay, take another step. And at some point, this other person will be in your face, right? They will have invaded your private space. It feels uncomfortable. That's a boundary. These boundaries are very different from people to people, right? There might be people who are like, you are my best friend. I am not crossing any boundaries. And other people who are like, you're on the stage with me. No, that feels uncomfortable. Can you please walk away? Boundaries are boundaries. They're individual. And we also have emotional boundaries. We have things that we are comfortable sharing with things that are uncomfortable sharing, things that we will share with some people, things that we're happy for everyone to know, right? There is a distinction between these three layers. We've got professional, personal, and private. It's something a teacher taught me about from when you teach children and take care of young people. And this is, you also use this model for conflict resolution. But the idea here is that you divide, that you have these three sort of layers to any person. You've got the professional, which basically is our education. It's our professional experience, it's what we know, it's our title, it's our role in the company. It is the professional work we do, and it is very, out there. It's not a secret. Not everyone knows, because, not everyone knows who I am, but, most people know. And then there is the personal, which is related to our personality and is, to a large extent, observable, right? It is how I act, how you observe me reacting. It is behavior, stuff like that, right? It's still relevant in a workplace setting, right? Because if I shout at people, that's a behavior that we probably should talk about, not repeating. And then there is the private stuff, which is our lived experience. That's where childhood stuff comes in, our upbringing. That's where trauma comes in. That's where successes and failures and all of that, that's where feelings, emotions, reactions come in. The private is private. It is for us and us alone, and the people that we invite into that space, right? I'm not saying that we should keep all of our private, just for us, but it is something that should be in our own control, and that if we are no longer in control of that private space, then boundaries get overstepped. All right. So, 2 primary risks. You can overstep boundaries in 2 ways, right? So basically, it's either one direction or the other direction. Which is that one way that these exercises, these trust exercises, can overstep boundaries is that people overstep their own boundaries, which is an extremely uncomfortable feeling. That's, again, group setting, asked to share your secret, asked to share something that's personal to you. It can also just be what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in your life, right? It can be seemingly innocent questions, like something that's your biggest disappointment, questions asked out of genuine curiosity. But if you're in a situation where you don't feel that you can't share, then you'll be overstepping your own boundary and going, yeah, okay, I'm going to open my heart to people that I really don't want to open my heart to. It is uncomfortable and can feel terrifying. Our nervous system will react to this in different ways. But basically what will happen is that the reptile brain will take over and we'll enter into, I think there are 4 states. Sometimes they, find more, so there might have been a 5th added lately. Fight, which is, I'm definitely not going to tell you. Flight, which is, I actually have to go to the loo now, I'll be back in a moment. Freeze, which is, I hope they're not picking me. I hope they're not picking me, pick someone else. And then fawn, which is, yeah, sure, here's my back, here's my, yeah, I'll give you my secret. The other one is harder to explain because this is something, overstepping a boundary is something that it's not really in your control, but it's something you do to yourself, right? Because of group pressure, yes, but it's something that, it's an action you do and you are the victim. Horrible? Yes. The other one is harder because it's triggering others by overstepping their boundaries, and often we don't do it intentionally, right? Because we're not douchebags, we are nice human beings, so we don't want to hurt other people. But if you've lived, I mean, you all look like you're older than 2 years, so you've probably realized that sometimes we do good things and end up hurting people, even though we didn't want to. What happens is that when we tell something, other people will hear that, and they will take that in a certain way. Now, what I don't know is what it's like to be you. I have zero experience being anyone else but myself. I don't know. So when I tell you something, I don't know how you're going to react to it. It might not really matter to you. You might find it slightly interesting. You might find it annoying. Or when talking about, the deep, dark, personal stuff, it might be something that really triggers a memory or brings you back into some trauma response. I don't know, because I'm not you. I'm not doing it intentionally. I'm just sharing something that I think is perfectly fine to share, and then suddenly you might be like, ugh. To give you an example, I have had traumatic experiences in the past. Now I'm better now. I've worked with a therapist to deal with that. But before I'd done that, I was in a cafe having a cup of coffee with my husband, and a couple of tables down, there were 2 guys having a fairly innocent conversation about something. But something in that conversation triggered my trauma response, right? So there are 2 blokes who don't know who I am, right? They will never know who I am. They don't care. I was just a weird woman, having a coffee. Absolutely innocent thing. But their conversation triggered a severe trauma response in me, right? They didn't intend this. They didn't even know it was happening. And in the same way that when we are sharing stuff, we risk hurting other people. It's just a risk. Nothing really we can do about it, apart from knowing that it happens. And this is also why trigger warnings are important, right? So if you do talk about stuff that you know can trigger people, give them the opportunity to step away, right? Just tell them you're going to talk about, whatever. All right, what did I have here? Yes, revisiting my point, that in the valiant pursuit of the psychological safety, right? It's not psychological safety that's the problem. Psychological safety is good. Psychological safety is something that we should cherish and protect, right? The problem is that how I've gone about, and also other people I have seen and still do see, go about achieving it, right? Because we end up, paving that way to hell with the best of intentions, and it is really well-paved road by now. I hope that, right, this is the last slide of the ranty bit, by the way, right? So I hope by now you've realized why I think that performative psychological safety is risky. That when we really try to achieve it and don't think about what we're trying to achieve, but think more about how it feels in the here and now, how it's, immediate satisfaction, then we risk doing harm to people, or even worse, we risk that people do harm to themselves. Unintentionally again, right? I do not believe anyone here is a douchebag or a psychopath. Right, moving on to the constructive bit. Question 3, how do we spot the performative, right? Actually, it's pretty simple. In my experience, there are 2 things to look out for. One is that are exercises focusing on the private bit, right? Is it stuff like, tell me about your secrets, tell me about something terrible that happened to you in your past, what is a huge mistake that you regret making, what is a profound experience that has shaped who you are today, right? Some of these questions just sound like they're genuine, I am interested in you as a human being, but they are all sort of encroaching on the private space, right? The other part is exercises that are designed to elicit a very strong emotional response. So that can be sharing circles, it can be, share something that's really hard for you, but something that really gives that powerful emotional response, which is extremely, makes you feel alive, but but that's what the exercise is designed for, right? It's designed to make you have a strong reaction in the moment rather than provide a long-term solution. How can we reduce the risk? Now, luckily, it's pretty simple, right? Because if one of the risks is, if one of the warning signs is that you ask that the questions asked are for the private sort of area, then just stay professional. Instead of asking what's the biggest mistake you regret making, go, what's a mistake you've made at work that you regret? And what did you learn from it? That's professional. People will then bring the private things that they want to, that they feel comfortable sharing, into the conversation, right? But keep it professional, right? Ask, what's a skill that you think is undervalued at work? And they might share something that they've done in their lives that is totally, that you did not know about them, that's private, right? It's about providing, opening the door and inviting people to share what they're comfortable sharing, rather than being like, this is where you've got to be, right? Share your private stuff, right? Because I want to see you air your hopefully not very dirty laundry. The other bit is setting healthy boundaries, which is, at least to me, this is the harder bit, right? This is the bit where I say, I don't think this is a safe question to answer. Right? I don't want to talk about this. I don't think we should ask these questions. One of my teams has a very lovely tradition of asking a question of the day, because they really like each other. We're a remote team. So it's one of the ways that we can connect. And figuring out we've done this for almost a year now, right? We're running out of questions. So one of my team members said, oh, I have one. What's the last thing that made you cry and why? And I was like, no. I love you all, but I'm not going to tell you exactly why I cried last time I cried, because no. There's no way in hell I'm going to share that. So again, it's about saying, I don't really know how to turn this into a professional one, because I don't hope that people have been crying. Like, when was the last time you cried at work and why? No, I do not want to. I do not want to ask that question. I do not want to work at a place where asking that question is relevant in any way, shape, or form. But, ask work-related questions, or ask questions that are sort of, if one of the really fun ones we had is what's your favorite pasta shape, which is, fairly, it's a fairly innocent question, and people can bring the private in, right? It can be, oh, it's this pasta shape that my grandmother used to make for me, and I really love thinking about her because she did this and that for me, right? So people can bring the private. It might just be like, I don't like pasta, sorry. Right? I prefer rice. Rice is my definite favorite pasta shape. But yeah, set healthy boundaries and be the one who says, let's keep it professional, right? Let's not ask these questions. And it's hard. Setting boundaries is really, really hard. So when you see someone who does set boundaries, acknowledge it, right? Especially if they do it well. If it's the shouty bit where they're like, yeah, so where they have such dysregulated nervous system that they're being extremely emotional about boundaries. Support them, yes, but rather, criticize the people who put them in a situation where that reaction was the one that was elicited. Right. What do we do when we mess it up? Because we are going to mess it up, right? We are going to do something that hurts someone at some point. We're humans. All humans do things with best intentions that end up causing pain sometimes. It happens. It's okay. It's part of being alive. And I think, again, because you can overstep boundaries. I don't want to use violate, because violate to me, again, I'm not a native speaker, but violate to me indicates that there's some sort of intention in it, right? Violate seems very aggressive and very forceful, because this is not what I expect that's going to happen, because again, assuming you are all wonderful, wonderful people. But what happens if you've crossed your own boundary? The thing is, I really don't know. Right? If you've crossed your own boundary, the only thing I can tell you to do is do whatever you need to self-regulate, right? Take care of yourself. You know yourselves better. I know what helps me, which is probably having a cry, having a rant, possibly sleeping, eating, stuff like that, going for a walk. But actually seeking the comfort of other people is what works for me. We're all different, so it might not work for you. So therefore, don't do what works for me. Figure out what works for you. If you don't know what works for you, learn. Work with a therapist. They're amazing. Or experiment. If therapists are also extremely expensive, so if you can't afford one, then use your friends. They are basically therapists for free. And especially the really good ones. Now, if someone else's boundary has been crossed, right, chances are you might not actually notice, right? Because people are really good at hiding this, because you might be in this situation where that person hasn't even noticed, right? And one of the hardest things for me to learn, actually going back to the slide before, is when were my own boundaries crossed. It took me a long, long time. I'm 40 now, I'm still learning, right? But I was in my late 30s when I really realized what that felt like. So there is a real chance that the person whose boundary has been crossed doesn't even realize it. They're just feeling really, ugh, right? But be empathetic, notice if something is wrong, right? And then listen, if they want to complain, if they want to rant, if they want to talk, if they want anything, if they want to just regulate, if they want to like, hey, this is my experience, but this was weird, what do you think? Just listen and don't fix it. Don't try to fix it. I know this is really tempting, but it's not what's needed in that situation. It's listen, just be there. The other thing that's really important is to know your own limits. I am not a trained therapist. I don't know if there are any trained therapists in this room, but if you're not a trained therapist, don't try to be one, right? Don't try to do therapy if you don't know what you're doing, because you might just end up causing more harm than good, right? So know your own limits. And especially for those of us who are line managers, sometimes saying, do you know what? Thank you for sharing, but I can't help you with that. Have you considered therapy is the right response? Or even, I can help you find a therapist, which is the last bullet, right? Ensure that the people who are suffering get the help that they need, right? You can't force them to get help. You can't guarantee that they will accept the help that they need, but you can help them. If where you work has mental health first responders, glorious. Know who they are, reach out to them and ask for them support. If your company does not have mental health first responders, do whatever you can to make sure that your company gets them, because they are worth their weight in gold. It is amazing. I've had mental health first aiders help me support a colleague through an anxiety attack, right? It was magnificent, because as the person helping, that is hard work. It is hard emotional work to help people who are suffering, right? So having someone who has your back and that you can lean on is really important, and it makes it easier for you to be there for other people. Right, so yeah, have a last slide. I think I promised you that we'd revisit this one, which is being authentic, showing vulnerability, and bringing your whole self to work. So for all of you who thought that my previous slide was really, really icky and a really misinterpretation of and misrepresentation of what authenticity, vulnerability, and bringing your whole self to work means, this is where I apologize and was like, yes, I know I was wrong. I have realized my mistakes and I apologize. I'm doing better now, which is also why I'm here. Being authentic is, yes, it's about showing emotions, being upfront about it, but it's also about regulating them. If you are sad, well, crying is fine, right? Crying is a way for the nervous system to regulate itself, so crying is definitely not as dangerous as some people think it is. But if you're really angry, instead of shouting at people, right, maybe say, hey, I'm angry, I need a moment, and go and deal with your emotions. You can still be authentic without being overpowering and being in the power of your emotions, right? There is a difference between response and reaction. I always mix those two words up, right? But one of them basically is that something happens, like that knee thing, right? When your doctor hits you under the knee and you go like this, right? Knee-jerk reaction, you can't control it, it just happens, right? So that happens sometimes. When we are angry, things happen to our body that we cannot control. But what we can do is that we can notice these things, and then we can go like, yeah, all right, I'm angry, but I'm not going to hit that person, right? I might want to feel like I really want to hit that person, but I'm going to step over here and find a cushion and hit that one instead. Or I'm not going to shout at that person, I'm just going to go breathe, right? So yes, be authentic, show your emotions, but manage them in a healthy way. Showing vulnerability. Brené Brown has a really good definition of this that I can't remember, so it feels a bit stupid mentioning it here. But being vulnerable is about putting a piece of you out there that allows other people to hurt you, right? I'm paraphrasing, she says it much better. But the idea being that I'm now doing something and I'm giving you some element of power over me. I'm now vulnerable, I am in your power, right? But it doesn't have to be about the dark, deep, powerful things that have happened. It can just be me saying, I'm really nervous about this. I don't know if I'm doing a good job. Please let me know. I mean, please reassure me that I'm not being a total twat up here. Right? This is me being vulnerable right now. Me being vulnerable about telling you about all the shitty things that have happened to me in my life, I'm not really vulnerable about those because I manage those. And if you tell me bad things about those, I'll probably just think you're an idiot and it won't really hurt me, right? So it would be fake vulnerability. It isn't real vulnerability. Vulnerability is when I put a little bit of my soul out there and give you power over it. It might just be a smaller thing as, I've written this document. Can you please provide feedback? Right? It's pull requests, goddammit. That's showing vulnerability. And bringing your whole self to work. I mean, the important bit here is that you shouldn't have to pretend you're something you're not. Don't mask, don't pass. Be the person you want to be and bring the parts of yourself to work that you want to bring to work. But don't feel that you have to tell your work colleagues about everything, right? So bringing your whole self to work includes your boundaries, right? And it's just saying, no, I don't want to talk about my family. Fine, boundary, that's bringing your whole self to work. If you are happy to share the names of your children and tell everyone what you've been doing on the weekend and about the birthday parties that you're planning, absolutely, do that. Yes, do share. If you don't, that's also totally okay. If you want to talk about kink, well, maybe ask the audience first if that's okay, but yeah, sure, go ahead. But it's about not having to, right? It's about the invitation. So, my question or my ask to you here, all of you, those of you who are practitioners, is to embrace the slow slog towards psychological safety because it takes time. It gets easier, but it takes a long time before it gets easier. And it is continuous work. And it is really very much like preparing public transport systems, right? It's annoying as fuck while you're doing it, and then it'll work and nobody will thank you for it. They'll just complain that the trains are a bit late, right? Psychological safety is exactly like that. And you might have managers being like, why are you not providing more psychological safety? I can see that you're not there because your team's not really high performing. Look at all the cycle times that I'm measuring for your team, right? It's like, yes, thank you, manager. I'm now going to criticize you because you want to have psychological safety, and that means that I can say things about you without you, thinking badly about me. There. Luckily, I work in an organization where we can do exactly that, and it is amazing. Once you have good public transport or good psychological safety, you really don't want to go back to a place where it doesn't exist. Right, last slide. This is the only pretty slide in the whole show, I know, but this is what you've got. You've got a little dinosaur. Please do leave me feedback. And I do think, do we have time for questions?
Yeah, probably top one.
All right, one question. Otherwise, find me and ask me questions.
About how to, if you're encouraging and trying to encourage psychological safety and authenticity, when you work with people who view any of that with a great amount of cynicism, such that even though you feel like you're trying to create a culture that is authentic, they view it as inauthentic and therefore end up kind of toxifying your efforts like a team.
All right, so rephrasing your questions about when very cynical people perceive attempts at creating psychological safety as dishonest. Yeah. Oh yeah, it happens. I mean, I think honestly, the only way that you encounter that is by being authentic, right? Over time, they will. I mean, if you are authentic and if you are true to your word and if you do what you say you do, if you're trustworthy, in other words, right, then they will, slowly you'll break down their cynicism, right? And for some people, cynicism is just a part of who they are. I'm a very cynical person myself, right? So I will say cynical things as a part of dealing with situations. So just see it as that, as a response to what's happening and be authentic. And move on. If you really believe in psychological safety, then one of two things will happen. They'll get around to it eventually, or they will leave the company looking for somewhere where they feel more comfortable. Interestingly, comfortable there might be finding something they feel more used to, rather than it being something that is actually more comfortable. But because we as human, our brain also really just doesn't want to change, right? Because change requires a lot of energy, and energy is bad. I mean, we want to preserve energy. So if we can repeat patterns that are entrenched, that's really good. That's also where biases come from, right? Biases, shitty consequences as biases have, they are also what help us keep us alive in the morning. And know that gravity actually also works today because it probably does today because it also did yesterday. So brains don't want to change. So when you have someone who is really opposed to working in a psychologically safe environment, they will probably perceive it as a threat. And then one of two things happen. They learn it's not a threat, or they go, I'm going to go to a place where I feel safe, which is ironically a place without psychological safety.
Cool. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, everyone.